Hello, did we actually do the theme music? And I was just looking down, or we just skipped the theme music?
It went.
It went? Wow, that was fast. I need to make that theme song longer. Hi, welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And look, now I see on my computer, there is a theme music. It did actually play. Look at that on the 20-second delay. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us this evening. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the show, first time joining us, welcome. The premise of the show is basically exactly what it says right down there in the byline: water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. What that means is we try to talk here on this show about whatever people are out there in the world are talking about around the water cooler. But what makes this show unique is we bring a uniquely Christian perspective to it. So we try to talk about things. What would it look like to talk about these issues if you really did put Christ first in your life? I think that's something that hopefully is helpful to a lot of Christian folks out there. And if you're not Christian, it might give you some insight into the way that Christians are thinking, you know, and the way we look at these issues. So, this is an audience participation program, so I'm going to invite you, no matter what platform you're watching us now on, to join in the conversation, join in the discussion. We are on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. We are also on Facebook, on the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. You can comment on either one of those platforms in the live chat on YouTube or in the comment section on Facebook. And when you do, your comment will appear in that blue box over there on the left side of the screen. And also, I will see it here on my computer, hopefully. If I don't, our lovely producer, my wife, will hold up a sign and tell me that I've missed something, and I will see it. And then as soon as there is an opportunity in the conversation, we will take up whatever you have to say. If you have a question, we'll answer your question, comment, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever. The important thing is you are as much a part of this show as we are, so please join in the conversation and let's have a discussion about these issues. We do have 5 different topics that we're going to talk about tonight. Before we dive into topic number 1, I did want to say a couple things. The first number 1 priority thing is, hey, while you're watching us, go ahead and pound that like button. Click on the like button on this video, and I'm talking to our YouTube audience right now, although you can like it on Facebook too. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But particularly our YouTube
and then
audience.
Hop over to YouTube and like that also.
Yeah, like that too. The more likes we get, obviously, the more YouTube is likely to recommend this program to other viewers on YouTube, which hopefully, if it is helpful, like we hope it is, that just gives us the opportunity to help more people see, you know, how Christians should look at these issues. So please give us a like here on the YouTube channel. And you can hit it multiple times as long as you end on an odd number. We established that last week. Don't end on an even number, you just turn it off and you undo your likes. So let's not do that. Also, one other quick intro thing we got to mention is that this show is normally on every Wednesday at 5:30. We actually will not have a program for the next 2 weeks. Next week is Ash Wednesday, and there is I still can't believe it's already Ash Wednesday. It was, I mean, I'm glad I got my Christmas decorations down in time. Hey, are your Christmas decorations still up? Comment in the live chat. No, but seriously.
When do you put Easter decorations out? During Lent?
I love how you think I have time to put Easter decorations out. I kid you not. I think it was last year. My kids and I went out and we put some Easter decorations out on the front lawn the night before Easter Sunday, you know. So, yeah, but then, you know, but my kids are, 18 and 13. They're not, I won't spoil anything here online for fear if they might be watching, but let's just say there's certain traditions that not that we don't do certain traditions, but
they're just not as important.
They're not
anymore.
as important. And now I just inadvertently probably opened a hole where people are going to say, you know, should you celebrate those certain traditions or not? Didn't we do a show on that? We did one a while ago, but under the old format.
Yeah.
So anyway, we won't go down that path. But anyway, it is almost that season.
Mm-hmm.
And so next Wednesday, we're going to have a live streamed worship service at 7 o'clock for Ash Wednesday. And then every Wednesday during Lent, if you were watching our channel back in December, we had on Wednesday nights, we had Advent at Home, our Advent at Home series, big hit. A lot of people really seemed to like it. It was kind of they were small, 20, 25-minute worship services, specifically for Advent. Kind of a unique feel to them. and people really seem to like them. So we're doing the same thing here again for Lent, starting the Wednesday the 24th, and those will be going premiering at 7 o'clock. However, during Lent, we will still be having Trinity Talk live episodes, but not on the 24th. So 2 weeks from now, we are not having an episode, and that's for those of you that know, my mother-in-law, Mary Kay's mother, Kathy Simo, has been very ill with cancer, and I'm sorry to say that this past Sunday morning we got the call that she did pass away. So first of all, I'm going to dedicate tonight's episode to Kathy.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll make her proud. But that the 24th is her visitation, and so I can't be here. Mary Kay can't be here. Now, technically, Ben could take out his phone, and he could live stream from his phone. That's about I think the extent you could do. You could do a mobile stream, right?
Yeah, I can.
And then it could just be Trinity Talk Live Ben edition, where you're just following him around with his phone.
For somebody who's so tech savvy, he can't do this all by himself.
Nobody can do all this fucking stuff.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that goes involved. Well, we did a little behind the scenes thing. There's a lot involved.
We should do that again.
Yeah,
we should do that again. So. Anyway, so I've vamped long enough to give people time to watch us if they're going to be watching us. So hopefully somebody's watching us. And again, comment in the live chat on Facebook, the comment section. Be part of the conversation. Speaking of the conversation, let's get it started. Ben, what's our first story?
Sure thing. Our first story tonight we got from faithwire.com, but any of you who watch HBO and are familiar with Bill Maher, he's a very popular TV personality, Bill Maher. And on his show, this was, the article is from February 8th, so this was one of his most recent shows. Bill Maher has been getting a lot of heat, I guess, or interest from Christians specifically, because he equated the Capitol riot with Christianity. The Capitol riot, of course, you remember, January 6th, when peaceful protest entered into or what started as a peaceful protest and entered into the Capitol and then became actually violent and deadly. But everything that's happened since then, Bill Maher has now equated with saying that it was a faith-based initiative. He said more than that he conflated the belief in conspiracy theories like QAnon with those who have faith in Scripture. And he has several quotes throughout this article from there, basically saying, as long as we're going to go into the trouble of another impeachment trial, we might as well be honest about what it's really about. And the events of January 6th were a faith-based initiative. Beyond that, he makes statements about the Christian nationalists. Of course, that's been circulating in conversations about the rise of Christian nationalism. And so basically he was saying that if you were at the Capitol, even if you weren't at the Capitol, if you just kind of support the nation, then you're a Christian nationalist, basically. But the interesting thing that I found at the end of this, and he has some comments in here with expletives that I won't share, but it's interesting because he said right after the events of January 6th, he said, as bad as last week was in early January, he said, let's not confuse 5,000 people with 74 million, the 5,000 people at the Capitol versus the 74 million who voted for Trump. He said, yes, even supporting the insurrection in spirit is, well, deplorable. But there's a difference between holding liberal beliefs and holding illiberal beliefs. Let's pin that for a second. And acting violently on them. At least that's what they always told me about Islamic terrorism. I've preached and still do that you can hate Trump, but not all the people who like him. And it's counterintuitive. Oh, wait,
Yeah,
that's
don't read
another,
that
I won't read that one. But
That would
basically,
be one of those expletive statements that he made.
yeah, he seems to have done a 180 where he said right after the events where you can what was it? Not confusing 5,000 people with 74 million, but now he's lumped an entire people group, i.e. evangelical Christians, together with this group, which is, depending what statistics you read, at least 74 million people. So, what do you think about all that?
Well, first, say hi to Jeanette Harrington.
Hey, Jeanette.
Hey, Jeanette,
Thanks
thank you for joining us. She's commented on Facebook. She's watching us here on Facebook. Second, I need a better on-air sign, or at least to illuminate it, because I don't know if you can hear the people walking by in the hallway outside. But we say we have no room in here. We're not kidding. Like, Ben's pressed right up against the door, and so hopefully you can't hear or pick him up on the mic, but there are people walking down the hallway. Anyway, so all right, first things first, I guess, to get to that last point that you were making about, how he shifted his tune, seemingly done a 180. Does that surprise me? No. I mean, especially in his field. I mean, it's a matter of Bill Maher has a persona, and a persona that is the expected by his viewers. And I honestly think that perhaps his initial statement may have been the more reasonable one, but it wasn't the persona that was necessarily expected by his viewers. And so what happens, of course, he turns around and he gives his viewers what they expect from him a few weeks later. Now, the other thing you need to know about Bill Maher is, first of all, if you get any of your, I don't know, if you think you're going to go to Bill Maher and get a deep philosophical analysis of an issue, you're not, all right? He's a comedian. He is notorious for, to try to put it as kindly as possible, not knowing what he's talking about. I mean, he doesn't. He just doesn't. And there's a few examples we can get into in here. But one way, whenever Bill Maher speaks, especially on religion, all right, and I will give him this, he speaks out against all religion. He's an atheist, all right. He does, probably picks on Christianity more than any other because he sees it as kind of the big religion of the country. But he has spoken out against Islam. He has done that as well. So it's not just a one-trick pony in that regard. But he has a certain modus operandi, certain thing he does. If anybody's ever seen his movie Religulous, which is documentary, which was an attack on religion, basically. He did this all the time. And it's what's called, in formal logical terms, is what's called hasty generalization. A hasty generalization is when you take, let's say there's a group you want to attack, all right? In his case, it would be anybody who believes in God, all right, because he's an atheist. And so what you'll do is like, okay, I'm going to find some subset of that group that's really easy to attack for one reason or another. And then I'm going to attack that subset and act as if by doing that, I'm attacking the entirety of it. Yeah. All right. That's what Bill Maher did throughout his film Religulous. That's exactly what he did here. What he does is he tries to take these rioters in DC, and were there a lot of them holding, Christian signage and chants? And yes, there were. There absolutely were. And we've talked about before how, we need, as Christians, need to be careful about, the fact that we're ambassadors of Christ and what kind of example are we setting. What Bill Maher has done here is it's his normal operating procedure, but it's also illustrative of that danger, because somebody's going to see the small subset, and then someone like Bill Maher is going to jump on that and say, see, look at all the Christians. Yep. This is what all Christians are like. And it's not even remotely what all Christians are like. That's a completely factually inaccurate statement. And what's most telling about this is that Bill Maher's response a few days afterwards shows that he knows it's a factually inaccurate statement. He's admitted as much in his initial response, and yet he still turns around. And this is really funny. I found this article. This is a blog post from 2013, mind you. And this is after his Religulous movie came out. And it's by an author named Greg Lanier. And he put up a blog post on his personal blog talking about Bill Maher and his tendency to do this. And he actually coined the term the Bill Maher fallacy. And he said the Bill Maher fallacy is deliberately choosing only to deal with the opposing viewpoints that are easy to disprove and using them as the foil for your own argument. So foil is what you hold up against your own argument to evaluate it, to say, look, my argument looks great because compared to this other one, it's far superior. That is playing the bully who picks on the little kids in the playground, but who always conveniently disappears when the football players and wrestlers come on the scene. That's Bill Maher. Bill Maher does not engage with any of the actual intellectual arguments in favor of Christianity. Yeah. He's a schoolyard bully who, let's face it, the schoolyard bully approach is also one of fear-inducing. Yep. It's if I ridicule another person, and you're on the outside and you're watching this happen, you don't want to identify with the person being bullied because you're afraid you're going to get bullied yourself. And so that's a tactic that a lot of atheists take, is let me ridicule Christians. I mean, Richard Dawkins flat out at the Reason Rally a few years back, flat out told people to do this. They ridicule Christians because then if someone is kind of they're undecided one way or another, and they see Christians getting ridiculed, at least subconsciously, they're like, well, I don't want to be part of that foolish group. And so they don't even think about the arguments. They don't even look through it rationally. They just, on a purely emotional basis, they don't want to associate with Christianity. And that's kind of what Bill Maher does here.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate representation of his tactic here. And it also kind of was reminiscent to me of, and maybe this is taking it a step too far, but this is just what it made me think of, you know, to label an entire group like Christianity and blame them for something, because that's effectively what he's doing. He's blaming blaming Christians for the attack on the Capitol, because he says in here, you know, conflates belief in conspiracy theory because Christians have already made room in their minds for the what was the word that he used? The ridiculous, basically.
Right.
And so,
but that's another schoolyard bullying.
That's
not actually addressing any of the arguments in favor of Christianity.
Right.
It's just attaching a label to them, saying they're ridiculous. Well, how about you prove they're ridiculous, Mr.
Right.
Maher?
Exactly. Yeah, it just kind of makes this assumption and then labels all Christians as that, and kind of made me think of when Nero blames the burning of Rome on Christians in 64 AD. You know, that's slapping a whole people group together. Obviously, all Christians couldn't have been responsible for the burning of Rome. And here, obviously, all Christians cannot have been responsible for the attack on the Capitol.
But what he's trying to do is he's trying to, I think, somehow spin it like the Christian theology or Christian belief system, the Christian worldview, I think, according to what he's trying to say, naturally, inevitably leads to these acts, which is completely false.
Right.
And it shows that he does not know or is deliberately lying about what the Christian worldview actually is. And just to give you another example, I mentioned you didn't know what he's talking about. I'm interested because you follow, you know, biblical genres and stuff. I got a kick out of this one when he was trying to compare QAnon to Christianity. He says it's fun to laugh at QAnon with the baby-eating lizard people and the pedophile pizza parlors. But have you ever read the book of Revelation? That's the Bible. That's your holy book, Christians. I mean, first of all, no, it's not.
Right.
I mean, and it shows that, I mean, we always talk about when you're reading the Bible, you read it in context. And part of that reading in context involves reading it in its literary context, understanding the genre that you're reading and what the parameters of that genre are. Revelation is apocalyptic literature.
Yep.
All right. There is a lot of figurative language and stuff like that in numerology. You look at Daniel and the weeks and all that. It's an inherent part of apocalyptic literature. Now, are there Christians today who I think also don't understand that and take things kind of, I will say, interpret Revelation in a way that I wouldn't agree with?
Right.
Yes, there are. But Bill Maher just tries to say, look, there's silly things in QAnon. I think there's silly things in Revelation. Therefore, he equates the two of them, you know, kind of thing. And again, it just shows, have you ever studied the genres of the literary genres from that time period? Obviously, you haven't.
Right. Completely missing the point. He's saying, you know, this is your holy book. Well, it's part of our holy book, yes. And that, just like you're saying, it's apocalyptic in scope, and there's a lot of poetic language that's used in there that is not necessarily literal. Same thing with Jesus's parables, you know. If we all believed that the parables were necessarily literal, then we'd all be walking around with one eye and one hand, you know. When Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And so, yeah, it just demonstrates a complete and total lack. And I can't imagine that it's not purposeful, because I can't imagine that in his entire career that nobody's ever engaged with him or attempted to engage with him on these issues, if this is frequently one of his straw men that he builds up.
Right.
So,
well, I guess here's my question: I guess there's different ways of looking at it as being purposeful. Could it almost be a Pharaoh situation where he's hardened his heart so much that, yes, people have said these things to him, but it's almost like it goes in one ear and out the other, because if what he's hearing isn't something that agrees with and supports what he's already got in his head, then it's not even worth considering. And it's cognitive dissonance, I guess, is the phrase, right? And so in that case, I could say, well, maybe it's not intentional or purposeful in the sense that that information really isn't processing in his head, but it's not processing in his head because of what he's done to his heart already, that he's not even giving it a fair shake.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of culture at large does that too. Where if something doesn't agree with your predefined belief systems, your predefined worldview, then it's dismissed automatically.
Well, especially someone like him. Think of what he's got at stake here.
Right.
I mean, his entire, we talked about him having a persona that his audience expects him to have. I mean, if he's wrong, which he is, I mean, if he's wrong about this, that has huge, from a worldly, earthly perspective, which is how he's going to be looking at things. Right. He's an atheist, all right? The stakes couldn't be higher. So he's not going to want to consider the alternatives in a serious manner, because he's built up this temple of himself, that would, he would lose everything earthly. Of course, we know he'd gain infinitely more, but he's not thinking of that right now. He's not looking at things like that right now.
That would also mean that he'd have to recant and apologize.
Yeah,
which is,
exactly.
Exactly.
So, the reason I like stories, this is not the first time that I've come across Bill Maher. Obviously, anybody. I mean, he's very outspoken against Christianity, against religion. But I guess whenever I'd encourage people, whenever you hear, because he's going to say stuff again in the future. And not to say that everything he says falls under this category, but a huge amount does. Look for that framework, that I'm going to take something that's true about some subset and pretend that it's true about the whole in order to make it look like I'm really disproving something about the whole when I'm really not. All right. And it's kind of like there's every good lie begins with a seed of truth. That's how Bill Maher works. He doesn't necessarily make things up out of whole cloth. So technically, it's not a straw man, because a straw man is where I construct a completely new version of my opponent's argument that's completely false. In his case, it's not completely false. It's true of a small subset. And then he takes that and pretends it's true of the whole. So whenever Bill Maher says whatever his next thing is, take a look at what he says with that in mind. And I'll give you 90% odds you're going to be able to see that framework in there, because that's what he always does. So
that's pretty blatant.
Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to our next story?
Sure thing.
This is a fun one. We're moving into the Super Bowl segment of our program. For those of you that didn't know, there was a football game this past Sunday. Yeah, there really was. So we've actually got two stories here that kind of stem out of the Super Bowl. One is, what is the Super Bowl known for?
Commercials.
Commercials, more so than the football game. It's known
terrible
for
halftime shows.
And terrible. Oh, that halftime show was painful. Oh, it was painful. I mean, it was. All right, I'm going to go on a little rant here from a purely production standpoint, because that's what I do. All right. The camera work was horrible. The audio was horrible. The mix. I mean, it was just. I looked at that and I'm like, did professionals actually do this? This was so horrible. Anyway. I'm going to leave that aside, but
No. My version of the rant, half the time it was for the in-person crowd, and then half the time it was for the at-home crowd, and they never struck the balance that they really needed to, so that it was for both in some way, shape, or form.
But believe it or not, our story isn't supposed to be about the halftime.
No. But the funhouse part, where he was inside.
Oh, give me a headache. Gave me a headache.
Yeah.
So
seizures. They're going to get sued for whatever.
Anyway, there was a commercial that's gotten some discussion that people have been talking about. And it was a commercial for Jeep that featured Bruce Springsteen. And what I found interesting is this is apparently the first commercial that Bruce Springsteen has ever done in his 48-year career. So that alone got attention with it. Now, the commercial opens, and I think this is the opening line, if I remember correctly, where Springsteen says, "There's a chapel in Kansas standing at the exact center of the lower 48. First of all, I got to say, and this is completely unrelated, well, somewhat unrelated, but when I was watching the commercial live when it came on, I couldn't get that part of it out of my head to begin with, because I'm like, we're not a box. I mean, we're not a circle. I mean, seriously, how do you calculate the exact center of a shape that, don't answer me, geometry teacher. She's thinking, I can see my wife's over there thinking about this, but the exact center of this weird, odd amoeba-shaped country. But anyway, that's what was going through my mind. It distracted me. No, don't answer it.
It's the center of the circle that's the shape is circumscribed by.
See, told you she couldn't resist. She couldn't resist. All right. but
Somehow
it's
I
not a
don't think
circle.
Bruce Springsteen had that in mind.
No.
Let me get out my protractor, draw it around the United States.
You need a compass.
That one. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to get us back on track here. So the commercial then went on from using this imagery of this chapel that's in the middle of the country to, well, it's no secret the middle has been a hard place to get to lately. Well, you can now start to see where this is going. There's definitely some political undertones here. And it says there's, let's see, the blah, blah, he kind of went into like a mini sermon really about the freedom and being the best we are, and there's hope on the road up ahead. Throughout the commercial, there was this recurring theme of the middle and trying to find the middle and unity and trying to unify and find unity amongst a lot of Christian imagery. I mean, crosses were popped up in this commercial over and over and over again, and obviously the whole foundation for it was this chapel that they were referring to. Now, they did say things, they didn't explicitly say anything about Christianity. They just kind of used this cross imagery throughout it. And they did talk about things about being the middle, being someplace that's for everybody, basically, no matter what your worldview is. I can't remember exactly how they put it in the article here somewhere, but it's basically this middle is someplace where everybody can be to find unity. All right. So, first of all, have you seen the commercial? Because you didn't watch the Super Bowl. I'm going to rat you out on air. You did not watch the Super Bowl.
No, so most of all this commercial, I didn't see the actual commercial, so my knowledge is strictly limited.
All right, so don't listen to him. I'm going to let him go first. But I actually watched it live when it came on, so I'm going to have more insight. But Ben, go ahead with your lesser opinion. What is that?
My lesser opinion. Ooh, shots fired. No, I mean, I do like how the author of this article kind of pulls us back to a reminder that regardless, because there are these quasi-Christian elements put into this commercial, and it keeps, as you're saying, harkens back to the middle, and of course there's political undertones, and so it's calling for political middle, and so the author kind of talks about what does the middle even look like from that perspective, for those in Christianity, even those on the left, the far left especially, have tried to avoid political or Christian rhetoric. And so what is
the bigger question is, what does this have to do with the Jeep?
Well, yeah, there's that too. What does this all have to do with a Jeep? But yeah, what are you really trying to sell us?
He was driving one in the commercial.
Yeah. What are you actually trying to sell us? But what does that even look like? What kind of concessions need to be made to reach that so-called middle? And is that even what we as Christians should be striving for? That's what I really appreciated about this author, was what should we as Christians really be striving for? Is it a political centrism, or, and he goes into scripture talking about how, the scriptural view of the biblical view of how a society should be how society should function and be structured really isn't a partisan kind of thing. It's it's more of a theocracy. It's not a democracy. And so anything that we have in this nation in its current iteration until Christ returns is going to fall short. And I think that's a perspective that we need to hear more often, quite frankly, and need to be reminded of and kind of keep in our minds. But yeah, it is kind of odd, Yeah, here, and again, I didn't even see the commercial, but reading all of this, I'm with you, Mary Kay. What exactly is the message getting at here?
And I will admit that I had one reaction that was the instinctive reaction when I was watching this commercial live, and then I've had a slightly different one after having had time to reflect. All right. I'm not going to tell you what the first one was, because that's, we're going to go the one that came after reflection. Upon reflection, I do, it's one of these situations where there are certain things that I think were good and certain things that were not. And so it's a mixed bag. I know I'm a mixed bag guy on the show. That's what I always am. I get the overall message of, they were trying to say we need to get past this division that's in our country. All right. We need to be unified. Whatever that means. We talked about that, was it 2 weeks ago? I can't remember when we did a show, a whole thing about
unity or conformity.
Yeah. Right. and what does that actually mean? But unity properly defined, as we talked about on that show, is something that Christians should be seeking and working for. Again, properly defined. It does not mean conformity. It does not mean uniformity. All right, necessarily. So I get that. And again, if we look at it from proper perspective, I did like that. My first reaction, and this kind of does relate to what my initial reaction was, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, it's just one of these things where even if I agree with the message, the timing and the messenger can detract from the message. The fact of the matter is, Bruce Springsteen is very outspoken politically, very outspoken. He's not exactly somebody you're going to put up there that people aren't going to know where he falls. All right, let's put it that way. He didn't make this commercial 6 months ago.
Right.
Okay. He didn't make this commercial a year ago. And it does, in my mind, detract from the message if you're only calling for unity. And with a caveat, I'll clarify in a minute. You're only calling for unity when your proverbial side wins and is in power. Okay, because what gets communicated, at least to me, and I think there's a different danger of that, is if that's the only time that you're really speaking up about these things, then you're not really asking for unity. You're asking for conformity.
Yep.
You're saying now that the right people are in place, now let's all unify around them.
Yep.
Which is really a call for conformity. It's not a call for unity, or I guess unity wrongly taken. It certainly is. Now I want to be fair. I'm not going to say that Bruce Springsteen never talked about unity before this. He did a few times, but it was always as more of an attack on President Trump. It was President Trump is not interested in unity, is kind of what he did have things like that. But this type of message.
Well, don't you think that if he was really in wanting unity, then he would have made this back then?
Well, and that's kind of my point. Is like, if I believe, and hopefully I've exemplified this on this program, is that no matter who's in power, we do need to love our enemies, to love our neighbors, and unity in that context, is certainly something that we as Christians should be pursuing no matter what. Whether your guy's in office, your woman is in office,
right,
somebody else is in office, it shouldn't matter. All right. And I do think that we, on both sides, we tend to see, and I'll be honest, you look at the conservatives, on the conservative side of the aisle, I think, before the election, you saw a lot of complaints that the people on the left were so opposed to unity and fostering the division and all this. And so it's and now where are those cries for unity now? And so it goes both ways.
Sure.
It's like if you were demanding and asking for unity 6 months ago, then you should still be doing it now. If you were doing it now, you should have been doing it 6 months ago. So I do think that detracts from the message, right, that you're trying to advance. The other thing that this made me think of is the middle, and you kind of hit on this too. Have you ever heard, and I'm going to get all philosophical here, but not too deep. Have you ever heard of Aristotle's golden mean? It's an ethical theory that was advanced by Aristotle, and it's one of these things. Philosophers love to talk about how do you define what's morally right and what's morally wrong. I'm not going to get into the Christian answer. The golden mean is not the Christian answer, okay? But Aristotle's answer was you can define the morally right thing to do by the golden mean. In other words, you take the two extremes. So in an eating example, if you had starving yourself versus gluttony, the right course of action would be in the middle, moderation, healthy moderation. And he tried to claim that is the approach across all moral issues, all moral questions. This, from a political standpoint, this Jeep commercial kind of does the same thing. It kind of sets up this thing like between the two political extremes, the right course of action is the middle. Well, it doesn't take long to think about. That's not always true. Sometimes extreme action is what's necessary, I mean, if you've got somebody who's about to come in and attack and murder your family, you've got courses of action. You could, run away and do, run away and hide, or you could, repel them with physical force. Well, the middle is, well, maybe I sit down and try to talk with them diplomatically. No! That's in that moment that the mean is not the right thing to do.
Not everybody has a live-in Dr. Phil.
Yeah, exactly. So the that's the problem I had philosophically with this commercial, is that it seemed to assume that the middle is always the right place to be, and that's not necessarily always the case.
Right. Yeah, it does hint at that later on here as well. And again, this goes back to the question that we keep talking about. What is, as Christians, the Christian perspective then is, where is our identity placed? Is it in our politics, whether it's left, right, middle? And we've talked about openly about our political stances, where we are, and we can vote one way or another on the issues, but at the end of the day, what's more important than that is where the golden. So our morality is not determined by the golden mean.
Mm-hmm.
Our morality is determined by the one who made morality,
right? Who defines what
us,
the definition is in God?
Exactly, i.e., Him. And so and sometimes following the logical, and maybe I'm off base with this, but would you then say that the golden mean? Sometimes the answer, like King Solomon, is cut the baby in half. So clearly, that's not the right one.
Yeah. And so sometimes the answer is not in the middle. It's
right
on one side or the other. And I'll tell you the other thing that I really liked about this article, and I think you kind of hinted at this too when you were introducing it. Was this quote right here? And who wrote this? Did we say that? I want to give credit
I don't
here.
think we did.
This is it's from Relevant Magazine, relevantmagazine.com, by Tyler Huckabee. I don't know if there's any relation to Governor Huckabee or not. But this sentence right here: Christians should be very wary anytime they see their faith used as a prop for politics. Mm-hmm. This is easy to do when we don't agree with the political party in question, but gets harder to do when we do, because it feels like a sign that we're on the right side. And this is kind of what you were hinting at before. There is no political party. There is no human construct at all that is going to be perfectly representative of Christ.
Right.
And so we need to be wary about where we're putting our first loyalties and where we're putting our first allegiance. Now, there may be, and there certainly are, political issues that overlap. We've talked about abortion on this show many times before as being a prime example of that. So I'm not a believer that there's faith issues and political issues. No, there is overlap, and so we do have to be free to talk about those things. But we have to be sure that we're not identifying or in an equal way, like saying there's an equivalency, a matter of equivalency between our political position and our religious faith.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
Anyway, that's that high horse, and let's move on, shall we? Ben, what is speaking of Super Bowl, which you didn't watch?
Speaking of things I didn't watch,
something else that Ben didn't even know about until I sent him this story here for the show. What's our next story?
So this is actually this one's from foreverymom.com. It's I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that website. But yeah, in reference to Sarah Thomas, who is the first female referee, which I have also been informed of that technically she wasn't a general referee. She was a down judge.
Well, yeah, there's referee as far as there's a specific role on the field.
He's the white cap.
The referee.
Right.
But then there's also kind of this colloquial general term we just call them all refs.
Yeah.
There's an umpire, there's field judges, there's down judges.
Yeah.
Isn't the white cap technically the referee?
I believe that's correct. Yeah. Somebody's going to correct me. If I'm wrong and you're watching us live, tell us in the live chat. Give us a list of all the football umpire referee positions.
And let us know exactly which one Sarah Thomas was. But this article refers to her as the first female referee at the Super Bowl and how she inspires moms and daughters everywhere. So it's kind of a brief article, but just kind of goes into, well, really what the headline states, that she's the first female referee at a Super Bowl to judge at the Super Bowl in whatever capacity she was there. She was a judge. And a lot of people took to social media to show their support for her, kind of seeing this as a glass ceiling moment. Of course, that phrase referring to breaking a gender barrier, that typically this role has been held by males. And so I do like her response, though. She responds by just saying, she didn't even see it as a glass ceiling moment. She saw it. She did it because she loves officiating. And so while people see meaning in that she was able to do so, well, that is, she says is good and honorable, that she was really just doing her job because, she's been in it for almost 20 years. she's been a referee, and she just had the opportunity to, and she did so because she loves it. But the fact that it's inspiring people is kind of a side benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think? You actually saw it.
I did.
So.
I noticed.
Did you disagree
I'd
with
seen
her
her
call?
before. Disagree with any of her calls? Not that I was aware. There were some calls that I did disagree with. I cannot tell you whether they came from her or not. So yeah, Tom Brady gets. Never mind. We won't go there. We won't go there. He won the game. Congratulations, Tom, on your 15 millionth Super Bowl. All right. Although I will say that I did take some solace in it, of knowing that Bill Belichick was afterwards probably looking, maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of him. Anyway, no, but I did notice her on the field. I'd seen her before because she's been working for the NFL since 2015, so it's not like she was a new hire this year. And that's actually what I found. I don't know. Really the coolest thing about this is, for those of you who don't know, the way the NFL works is it's not like a random lottery. It's just, we're going to pick these refs to the Super Bowl. You got to earn it.
Yeah.
Now, I can't remember, and somebody, again, if you're watching, in the live chat, you can let me know whether or not they're some of them do it as an individual basis.
Just so you know, there's a referee, there's an umpire, there's a down judge, a line judge, a field judge, a side judge, and a back judge.
We're trying to engage the online audience, getting them to tell us these things. If you give us all the answers.
Yes, but Jeanette's the only one who's speaking up.
Yes, and she clapped too.
Yes, I know.
1 minute ago, Jeanette clapped on Facebook. So
the rest of you just got to get your stuff in gear, so I don't have to look it up myself.
Even if you don't know the answers, you can Google them. No.
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, here we go. Bethany Duke McComber says, I heard her on the news today, and she seems like a pretty amazing woman. She is a Christian, very humble and kind. That's great to hear.
Awesome.
And I'll tell you what, the point I was getting to that really encourages me about her is, again, you have to earn it. Now, some of them, they may have gone back and forth. It used to be that you'd earn it on an individual basis, so they would take the highest rated referee, umpire, whatever, at each of those positions, and they would kind of create a super team of refs. And there's also the argument that no, they just take the highest rated group. So if they've spent the whole season together, they don't want to break it up, for the Super Bowl, for the playoffs. But either way, all right, you got to earn it. Mm-hmm. Which shows this isn't just let's get the token female in there.
Right.
It's not that. That's not the way the NFL works. This is someone who has proven that she can do the job. Mm-hmm. And she has the right mentality of, it's like, I didn't even think about it as a glass ceiling. No, she's just doing the job that she loves. And, like it or not, you are inspiring people, Sarah Thomas. I've got a daughter. You've inspired me on her behalf. And another thing this article said that I kind of like. I mean, the image it puts out there of women is, shall we say, not the way women have been historically portrayed in industries such as the National Football League.
True. Yeah, exactly. In the typically you see women at the NFL as cheerleaders. So that's about the extent of it.
Or J-Lo.
Can I ask a
going back to
question?
the terrible halftime shit.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
You said how long had she worked for the NFL?
The NFL since 2015.
Okay, so I wanted to know what the answer to your question was about how they go about picking them. Mm-hmm. And there is like a grading system, like an evaluation system for the officials, and whoever's the highest ranking in each position is how they get it. How they evaluate them, I know it has stuff to do with something to do with the quality of their calls. But again,
it's at each position, not the unit as a whole, not the team.
Yeah, that's what it
That
it
just
says.
even more shows that she earned.
Yeah.
it.
The NFL. Wait, hold on. The NFL's highest. Okay, this is from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, as all things from Wikipedia deserve to be taken. The NFL's highest rated official at each position is selected to work the Super Bowl. This is determined by the league using an evaluation system to grade each official's calls during the year. However, only officials who have worked in the league for at least 5 seasons and have previously worked during the playoffs are eligible to officiate in the Super Bowl.
So this would be pretty early on, if not the first season.
5 seasons.
Or I'm trying to think. If she started in 2015, that'd be the season this would, I guess, her fifth season would have been the last season.
Right.
15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So the 1920 season would have been her fifth season in the league.
The first time she's eligible.
Right. So I mean, but that just shows that she's done
Now,
an impeccable job.
the only caveat to that is a referee cannot serve as a Super Bowl the referee position because they're the head of the group of officials. In addition to the at least five seasons, having previously also worked a playoff, during a playoff season, they also have the initial thing where they have to have been a referee for at least 3 years.
Okay.
So somebody could, I guess, move from back judge to side judge and in 1 year get to be the side judge that shows up in the Super Bowl, but you can't, excuse me, you can't do that for referee.
Yeah. Well, I love the story. I love seeing her on the sideline, and yeah, I think I love her attitude about it. If Bethany's telling us here about the interview, she's a Christian woman, very humble and kind. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those feel good stories about, hey, maybe there is something going on right in the world. So let's move on to things that haven't gone so right in the world, and that's California. No, wait. I'm sorry. I love some people who have lived in California, but they got out. My brother and sister-in-law, who probably are not watching the show, but anyway. So speaking of California and the Supreme Court, which we weren't speaking of, but that's the best transition I got. I'm sure you've heard, and we've talked about on the show. It's been a while since we talked about it. But California in particular has had a number of COVID hotspots. And they have, Governor Gavin Newsom has at various times throughout the pandemic imposed different restrictions upon public gatherings. All right. Now, one of these restrictions that has been in effect in certain hotspots within California is a ban against churches gathering. I mean, they weren't allowed to gather indoors.
Yeah.
Period. They were not allowed to have indoor gatherings. Churches were not allowed to have indoor gatherings at all. A number of these churches took the case up and went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually overturned that restriction. Now, that does not mean that Governor Newsom can't impose any restrictions upon churches. That's not the case at all. And there are restrictions. There's still capacity restrictions, things like that. The issue was one of consistency. And I don't know if this article that I sent you actually hits on another one that I sent did. And one of the points that was raised, I believe was by Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote the majority, I think it was the majority opinion, is that in some of these hotspots, for example, Hollywood is allowed to film a show in front of a live studio audience.
Singing show,
right? In front of a live studio audience, as long as they abide by certain restrictions as far as the seating capacity and no more than 25% of your capacity and things like that, and social distancing and all that. But as long as they abide by those, they're still allowed to have these public gatherings. The restriction was, but churches can't gather at all. And so the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. Basically, you've got to be consistent.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this?
I thought on one hand that it was good for those churches in California, and correct me if I'm wrong, isn't one thing that we've kind of been following, that's been a story adjacent to this, is Pastor John MacArthur. Isn't his church in California?
Yes, his church is in California.
Yeah, so they've kind of been along with this whole battle of getting back in person, and so he's calling it a peaceful protest and all of those, and we already went down that road. But so in one regard, it is a win for those churches in California. Now, that doesn't, give them free reign to have, just so you're saying, there's still some restrictions in place. Notably, there's 25% capacity restriction, as well as no singing. There's a ban on singing still,
Right.
to my understanding, which is still that point of contention where shows are still allowed to, singing shows are still allowed to be filmed and aired, whereas even a church that is at their 25% capacity with social distancing are still not allowed to sing. Right. And some people in this article, one of the churches said, singing is 50% of our worship. It's just not feasible. We're going to sing. And so how do you skirt around that? So yeah, this is my point, my turn to be in the mixed bag category, because
it's not just me.
Yeah, I'm glad on one hand that there's a win here, because it's it's taken months, but on the other hand, it's taken months for this to happen. So it's kind of revealed this precedent where the government can overstep, which in this case, since the Supreme Court overturned it, it wasn't overstep. But now it just took so long to get to that point where it was even recognized as such.
Yeah, and Bethany McComber here on Facebook says there are churches around here that have not allowed singing.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely true. And I'll preface my comments by saying that I do agree, and we've said in the show before, that churches should, love your neighbor, and that if you go into this issue without keeping that at the forefront, then you're going into it wrong. All right. We are commanded to love our neighbor. And so we do need to, our response should not just be, let's all gather and do everything like we used to do. Right. I mean, I had several bones to pick with John MacArthur. I did, okay, with some of the things he said on it. I didn't think that was very loving. Now, that being said, this was a matter of consistency. So, I have no problem, personally, if they have a 25% capacity limitation across the board of churches having to abide by that. And or having to, you get into the matter of, government restriction versus what the church should do of their own accord. And that's something I think gets lost in this whole thing is, regardless of what the government is saying you can and can't do, we should be looking at as far as what Christ would want us to do,
right.
To be loving our neighbor. And there is a balancing act. Yes, there is worship that is involved. And we should be worshiping. Mm-hmm. Do we need to do every single thing that we do in order to worship? That's a whole other rabbit trail that I won't go down. But we need to at least be thinking about it from that framework. In this case, what I found most disturbing about this story was the fact that this decision was not unanimous. It was divided along political lines. And I'm sorry, as a lawyer, this was so obviously, in my mind, so obviously unconstitutional.
Yeah. The decision was what, 6-3?
6-3. It was right on political appointee lines. Okay, and the three dissenters and the dissenting opinion, it was very much of just talking about, well, we don't think we should get in the way of, we should leave decisions about how best to handle this pandemic up to the local government, the state government, and what they think is best in their locality. And part of me is thinking, but if the way they're handling it infringes upon constitutional rights, that's your job.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why you exist as a court, all right, to step into those situations. And in this case, the freedom of religion is guaranteed by our Constitution. And you can't treat someone differently.
Somebody needs to go back to high school American government, and remind them what the words checks and balances mean.
Well, yeah. And my thing is, you can't treat someone differently and worse in this case solely because they are a religious institution.
Right.
And that's what was going on. I mean, the rules weren't the same for everybody across the board. And and Bethany here talks about the fact that there are certain churches here that are not allowing singing. And you know what? If that's what that particular church decides to do as a loving thing, great. Go for it. I mean, that's obviously not what we've decided here at Trinity, although we are all wearing masks,
right?
Even our singers. But if that's with it, as long as the church is looking at it from a perspective of how do we best love our neighbor, and that decision they come to, I'm all for supporting them, absolutely. But the problem here with this story is that Governor Newsom was instituting rules that had one set of rules for Hollywood and another set of rules for churches. Mm-hmm. You can't do that. Treat everybody the same across the board, and then we really don't have a right to complain.
Right. And now there are, even this article talked about, there are some churches who decided, even though that restriction has been lifted and they've been allowed to come back to 25% capacity, such as, what was the last one? The Archdiocese of Los Angeles, I believe. Mm-hmm. One of the churches there has not decided to come back even at 25% capacity, because that's still 500 for them.
Right.
So they see that as irresponsible. To even allow 500.
Yeah, but then they're making a decision based on what their particular congregation size is, what their particular facility is like, what the what the entrances and exits look like for them. St. Patrick's, the church that the Catholic Church I attend in Havre de Grace, it doesn't have a lot of, a large in and out kind of narthex like we do here at Trinity. So they're not using the actual church. They're having mass in the parish hall where it's a bigger space. It's easier to be socially distanced, but it also has that larger space that people can get in and out of and still maintain that 6 foot of distance. So, but that's a choice that the church is able to make based on their particular situation.
Right.
And yeah, and so
well, even here at Trinity, I'll tell you one, and Ben, I'm sure you remember this, the conversations we were having as a vision team and everything when COVID was first hitting, and when we did first find out, for example, that we were probably going to be allowed to come back in person, was some of these same kinds of questions. Yes, Trinity has a lot of we have a big narthex, we got a lot of doors. We only have one each of there? Bathrooms.
Yep.
And and the restrooms, I don't know how many stalls in the women's room, never been in there, but there's what, 1, 2, 3 in the men? 4,
yeah.
Something like, not a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, how do you manage those traffic areas? But that's kind of the point. It's like, if a church, as long as they're thinking of how best do we love our neighbor and they come to these decisions, that's fine. But when a government starts treating churches differently and specifically putting churches at a disadvantage, and it's kind of like, was it Nevada? I can't remember what when Nevada was trying to keep churches
casinos?
from they wouldn't allow churches to gather, but the casinos could be open.
Yeah.
That shows you, when you have rules like that shows you what your priorities are.
Absolutely.
In Las Vegas, it's casinos. In California, it's Hollywood. And churches and Christian faith is not high on their priority list.
Yeah.
And that's why the court is supposed to exist, to kind of checks and balances, like Mary Kay said, to be a check against this kind of thing happening.
Yeah, I did want to get your opinion on something. Now, I try not to make it a point to necessarily read all the comments on these articles, but there was one that I wanted to kind of pick your brain about. This person, Rodney Cood, I think, responded to this article and said their issue with the SCOTUS ruling was that their responsibility, the Supreme Court's responsibility, is only strictly to rule on, is this constitutional or not, nothing more. So to rule in favor of the churches, but then put their own guideline limits into place, such as the 25% capacity and the no singing limit, was an overreach. So what's your opinion on Supreme Court's responsibility? Is it just strictly to say this was unconstitutional and overturn what
Look, I could be correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the decision is the Supreme Court didn't say, and these are the restrictions you have to impose and the only restrictions you can impose. Right. It wasn't that. It was, you can't do this because
there was a caveat that
right.
They can still.
It's like you can't have this blanket limitation on churches gathering and all. That's unconstitutional, and that was decided on constitutional grounds. All right, but you can do X, Y, or Z, and the X, Y, or Z, to my understanding, were restrictions that California itself already had in place for other venues. So I don't think, and I could be wrong on this, and if I am, somebody can let me know. I don't think the Supreme Court just made up its own restrictions out of whole cloth.
Right.
It was taking what California was doing in other contexts and saying, this is permissible.
Right.
So you can still restrict in the interest of public health, but you can't have one set of rules for one group, another set of rules for another.
Right.
So,
yeah.
All right.
Makes sense.
We got one more story for today, and Ben's going to tell us about it.
All right. So this one kind of carrying the trend of concerning government overreach. There's a new law in Denmark that they are proposing to pass. It's a proposal of a new law in Denmark that could require pastors to submit sermons to the government. Now, the context behind this is specifically there are different languages. 90% of Denmark is of Danish descent, but there are different languages that churches speak in. Specifically, this proposed law was to limit Islamic radicalism. So for mosques and things like that, they would have to translate all of their messages that would be in Arabic into Danish. But this also spills over into churches that speak in, I think Farsi was one of them, and Greenlandic was another language, which are native languages. So beyond that, everything needs to be translated. The proposed law says that all of these messages need to be translated into Danish and submitted. Now, it's not clear whether it needs to be submitted before they are given or after the fact. But still, there's a lot of uproar based on this, because it's imposing a burden upon the pastors of these churches to not only have to pay for the translation itself, or somehow spend the extra time and or money. It could be costly, and there's a lot of nuance with translation too, such as idioms and phrases that could get lost in translation. And so it's a very painstaking process to require this for not even necessarily a weekly basis, but in some cases more than once a week. There's weddings and funerals and all sorts of messages that are or services that are conducted at these churches that every single message would have to be translated for. And so, and of course, obviously the big concern here is also government oversight of what is permissible, and easily lends itself to censorship. So what say you?
I have a real quick question. Did it say anywhere in the article like what was the instigating factor or
Islamic extremism.
Islamic,
That's what they're trying to.
I mean, did they have an instance where they think that?
No, they've had an influx. I can't remember how much their population is, but an influx of Muslims in Denmark.
Okay, but
313,000.
Yeah.
And have they had also an influx of?
I'm sure
activity?
they've had incidents of Islamic extremism, and their concern is that well, we'll get to that in a minute. But the idea is they're trying to pass this law so they'll know what's being taught, to try to stamp out instances of extremism when it results. But there's unintended consequences, I guess, of something like this.
Yeah.
And let it not be said, I guess, that this is one of those examples, I guess, where it might be surprising. We're going to hear a couple Christians, I'm guessing, defend or speak out against a law that actually would benefit. I mean, its intention is to be anti or against, I don't want to say anti, but against Islam. And this is one that we can kind of come together and say no.
Right.
So what's interesting about this, and I did do a little bit of looking at this, that Denmark theoretically does have freedom of religion and freedom of speech and all that. Now, I'm not obviously an attorney or anything. I don't even know if they call them attorneys or what they call them in Denmark. But their constitution says this. It says, in regard to freedom of religion, it says, the citizens shall be entitled to form congregations for the worship of God in a manner consistent with their convictions, provided that nothing at variance with good morals or public order shall be taught or done. That's in their constitution. So I have no idea how that's been interpreted by their legal system over time. Now, I'm just reading the Constitution. And just based on that, with that caveat it has there at the end, I can see where that kind of caveat can lead to something like this. Because who's deciding what is at variance with good morals or public order? Well, it's going to be the government. And so that does potentially open the door for what we would consider to be government overreach. And so clearly I'm just speaking purely from a moral perspective. I have no idea what their legal system is and whether their legal system would allow this or not. But yeah, I mean, it causes concern. Even leaving aside my biggest issue is not the expense. Although the expense is certainly one that's there. I mean, if you think about, what qualifies as a sermon and a teaching. I mean, think of everything we do here at Trinity. Bible studies, fruits of the Spirit. Yeah. Sorry, Jess, you got to learn how to sing it in Danish. I can't even do a bad Danish impersonation, but you don't know what fruits of the Spirit is, Ben will sing it for you later. So
la, 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 la. That needs no translation.
But there's teaching. I mean, that's our Sunday school program. There's teaching that goes on in that. So we're going to have Professor Bibleton. And no, that was horrible. That was just horrible. Yes, it was that was really bad. I'm not even going to try to do I don't do accents. Anyway, but it raises that kind of question as far as, how much do you really have to turn into the government? But leaving that aside and the expense and the inconvenience of it, the mere fact of having to turn this into the government, it's one of those things where even sometimes the most legitimate of goals is not properly pursued by illegitimate means. And this would fall into that category in my mind. Should we be trying to stamp out Islamic extremism? Absolutely. All right? Absolutely. That's a goal we should all be able to unify around. We don't want people getting blown up. Okay? But does that mean that any means is appropriate in order to achieve that goal? And the answer to that is no. My wife's got her finger on the mute button, so obviously she's going to say something now.
Yeah, I have another question for you.
Okay.
So, did it have in the article the actual, okay, it's not going to be in Danish, but the actual wording of the law? I mean, is it that they could? I mean, because I'm reading the byline here and it says Denmark could require pastors. So is it sort of opening the door to giving the government the right to ask for them if they suspect something?
No,
No, I think.
Or
needs
is
to
it
be
just a
handed
blanket?
over.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you have to give us all your sermons and teachings and whatnot. We don't care.
I think the could in the headline is born out of the fact that this wasn't intended to target Christian denominations. It was really intended to target
And that
Islam
it's-
extremists.
And it's a proposed law instead of an actual law?
It hasn't been passed yet, right?
Yeah.
And they were saying, well, wait a minute, think through the consequences of this. I know you're not intending to target Christian churches with this, but the way you're phrasing
Well,
this,
it doesn't.
that's what you're doing.
They shouldn't be targeting mosques either, unless
Right.
unless
If
they
you don't have
have
any
some.
reason.
I mean, I can understand it if they had, in America, I'd equate it to bringing some evidence to a judge for a warrant.
Right.
If you had some evidence that led you to believe that this particular mosque is actually inciting violence and organizing it within under the guise of, okay, it's not Sunday Mass, but under the guise of services.
Mhm.
I guess I can understand the government then, wanting translations to be made, but
here's the other thing I wonder about. How this just makes me think the law is stupid too, okay? If you're worried about someone translate, like I'll give you an example, okay? I come up to you, Ben, and I say, "Donde está el baño?" And you say, "Ken, what does that mean?" "Oh, I'll tell you what that means. That means you owe me $20. If I'm the one, that's not what that means. For those that don't
It
speak
means where's
Spanish.
the bathroom?
Exactly. Thank you. Why, if you're worried about a particular teaching going afoul of your constitution here, why would you have the one you're suspecting of doing this bad thing be the one who's translating it? Okay.
is that what the law says, that they
Yes.
would be,
Yeah, that they provide the translation.
they provide the
Yeah.
So this article
That is
doesn't
kind of
give-
dumb.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I shouldn't have said that
This
way.
article doesn't give the exact language.
But
of
it
the
doesn't.
proposed
It
law.
doesn't seem to be the most intelligent choice.
Yeah. And speaking of it, Albert Mohler of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, basically he comments this, said, which I think is kind of the crux of the matter, which we've all been talking about. He says, "You're talking about a Western nation that is threatening to require all pastors, that would include Christian pastors, to submit sermons in advance." So it does say in advance, "to pay for the transcription of the message to make certain that the message is delivered to the government. That means that the Danish government now claims to itself the power to approve or disapprove messages."
I can tell you after helping live stream all of our Sunday services here at Trinity for the past almost year, that if Pastor Jay were the one to submit his sermon, he doesn't ever stick to it.
But they made that point in here that not all pastors have actual transcriptions of their message. Sometimes it's
I
extemporaneous.
mean, if it's going to be before, I mean, look at Reese. A lot of times she goes off of the, well, I don't want to say off the rails, but she takes a detour during the middle of a message because the Spirit leads her.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't believe that.
But
I don't know many pastors that read the script. You know,
it causes concern, and I guess my biggest issue was, and I'm curious if it made you think of this as well or not. But anytime we hear a story like this here in America, I think we tend to think, oh, well, that's over in Denmark. That's not going to happen here. 2014, and when I looked this up, I couldn't believe it was this long ago because I didn't think it was this long ago. 2014, the city of Houston issued subpoenas for 5 pastors to deliver their sermons, subpoenas for their sermon text, because they have a local anti-discrimination ordinance, and they were supposedly worried about whether or not the teachings that were being spread by these pastors were at odds with the values of this anti-discrimination ordinance. And you can kind of figure out exactly the specifics from that. But there was a huge uproar, all right, over that. And after the uproar, needless to say that the mayor of Houston did back down and say, "Oh yeah, it was poorly worded, too broadly, raised." They're like, "Okay, but that's not what you did, right?" And so this isn't just a danger overseas. I mean, this is a danger we've seen right here exhibited in America, where government can, look, government is made up of people. All right. Yep. People have agendas. People have their own political beliefs. People have their own religious beliefs. And like it or not, we're all fallen human beings. All right. And it's going to happen that there's going to be government overreach. That's what, going back to the last story, that's the Supreme Court's job.
Yeah.
But
the checks and balances.
The checks and balances.
Yeah.
But it made me think of that when I read the story. I was like, wow, that sounds awfully similar to what happened in Houston a few years back.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes into that as well, that there is the danger there that other countries will follow suit, especially however well intended, that or I guess depending on your worldview, if you're an Islamic extremist, that's not well intended. But the danger is that it's not unprecedented here, and so it's not that far of a stretch.
And I do think that there's a lesson in here for everybody to take to heart. And we speak to Christians obviously on the show. And that's what I was getting at before, that even the most noble of ends does not justify every possible means. And so I think we see that a lot when people will do something and they'll do something wrong. They'll step over a line, but the justification is always, well, look what I was trying to achieve. Well, the question isn't just what you were trying to achieve, it's how did you go about doing it? And in this case, yes, stopping Islamic extremism is a good thing, and we should be pursuing that. But not at the expense of these liberties that your Constitution claims to enshrine, and that our Constitution claims to enshrine, and claims to, our Declaration of Independence claims to have, come from the Creator, and as all rights do. I mean, literally, we get a philosophical argument. There really is no such thing as an object of right without God to begin with. But so I think there's a valuable, not only do we speak out against laws like this, but or propose laws like this, but there's a valuable lesson for us all to keep in mind, because it's not just there. I think even we as Christians can have the tendency to want to, well, I'll give you an example. The abortion clinic bombings, there's a prime example.
Unintended consequences.
The fact of the matter is that you want to stop abortion, and that, in my mind, is a good goal. All right. But that does not justify every means of achieving that goal. Right. And sometimes the means can become more evil, or at least as evil as what it is. You can't claim to be pro-life if you're killing people.
Right.
Like
that.
Exactly. So, anyway, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Is that it? That's our show. So. That's our show. We're done. I want to thank everybody who did participate in our chat this evening. Jeanette and Bethany, thank you very much for joining in.
Yes.
Just one last reminder, we mentioned this at the top of the show, but we will not have a show next week. Instead, we will have the Ash Wednesday live stream at 7 o'clock here on the channel. We will also have, we will not have a show the following week either. We talked about that at the top of the show as well. And we will be back, I guess it's what month is it? Today's February, so there's no 31st of February.
March, yeah.
So it's going to be the 3rd of March, I think it is, something like that. Whatever that Wednesday is. We'll be back on the air.
Yep, you're right. 3rd.
See, I do math. I math. As long as it wasn't a leap year, I was pretty confident I was good. And it's an odd year, so it shouldn't have been a leap year unless I'm completely off base. So anyway, but yeah, just by way of reminder, we do have the Bible study that's going to be following us here tonight. The Life of Paul Bible study taught by Bill Rearig will be on the YouTube channel here at 7 o'clock p.m. tonight. That will not be on next week, all right? Because of the live stream of the Ash Wednesday service. Thank you. But he does still have, I want to say, 2 more weeks to go, I think. So he will resume at 7 o'clock on Wednesday night, the following week after Ash Wednesday. So actually, there's going to be 2 things on the channel at 7 o'clock for those first 2 weeks. The Life of Paul study, and then, of course, the Lenten services will both be going on at 7 o'clock. Don't worry. Pick which one you want to watch live, and then you can watch the other one. They stay on the channel. It's not that big of a deal. And I think, and I didn't get through the whole thing, but based on the first 20 or 25 minutes that I did get through and where he was at that point in time, I think somebody at this table finally made it through the Old Testament.
Yeah.
In his Bible study.
We did, yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that one?
7 steps to Bible skills. We are still on step 2 after week 4 or 5. Step 2 is a very long one where we go kind of a bird's eye view approach to every single book in the Bible. So we finally made it through the Old Testament, and now we're in the New Testament. So hoping to finish that up tomorrow, and then we'll be on to step 3 the following week.
Tomorrow at 7 o'clock.
Tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Yeah,
Right,
join us here on YouTube, or if you're on Facebook, go over to YouTube.
Yeah, 7 o'clock, Trinity Talk YouTube channel. Check that out. And I got to say, that's really cool. This is why I actually started watching. Mommy, I love you too, to begin with. But I mean, there's a lot of people get intimidated by the Bible, obviously. They want to say, oh, 66 books are going to start. I can never possibly read all that. And I think a good place to start is getting that general overview, because not only does that, it's not the same as reading it, don't get me wrong, but it does at least give you a framework. And like one thing you mentioned in that class last week that, of course, I absolutely agree with, is the lens that you read it through has to be the Old Testament is looking forward to Christ, and of course the New Testament is looking backward to Christ, but it's all looking at Christ. And so that the advantage of the approach you're taking and going through and giving these overview of the books really helps people see that overarching theme.
Right.
And so then when you do go through and you do read the Bible, cover to cover, which obviously I recommend for everybody, it helps you get a little bit more and focus on Christ and see Christ throughout that. So
yeah, liken it to a mosaic. You got all these different tiles, and then when you piece them all together, it gives you that portrait of Christ.
Yeah. So it's really good. At least the 25 minutes that I watched were really good. So I highly recommend. Although the first 5 weren't that great, you were just waiting to get started. Yeah. But but yeah, that's gonna be 7 o'clock tomorrow night. So please join us for that. So yet again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Mary Kay, for being our lovely producer and for all the contributions and insights this evening. We are going to have to get a producer cam on you if you're going to talk this much. So I'm letting you know. People want to see the face behind the voice.
They can see the mask.
I was gonna
behind
say
us.
Nobody sees the faces right now anyway. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you,
as
Ben.
always. Thank you all for watching. We will see you back here for this program in 3 weeks. But there's plenty of other things going on here on the channel, so subscribe if you haven't already. God bless everyone.